so much for being here today. Good morning, everybody. Bonjour. Today, I will be talking about altitude maps. It's a framework I've used at every company that I've advised since I left Gojek, a startup that provides transportation, food delivery, and logistics beyond 30 other different services based in Indonesia. And I spent 5 years there, but I grew up in America. And so before I fly halfway across the world, I asked, what data do I need to know? Joining as the first data hire of this startup, about 30 people, there must be some analysis, some data that you've already looked at. And this is what I got. Not a Post-it note, but a picture of a Post-it note. And so I said, great, this is a pivotal starting point for me, because I view everything in life like I do product management. It's a game. And every great game has a fog of war. My fully visible area is where I understand the KPIs that I am currently working on, I understand the metrics that I care about, the experiments that I've just run. But then there's also this foggy area, the metrics and KPIs of my manager, of my peers, the other PMs on my team who happen to work on other product areas. And I might understand some of their KPIs, but the second I turn and look at my own, that area becomes foggy. And then there is the fully hidden area, the KPIs and metrics I've never even considered, the experiments that I haven't even run yet or even considered. And these consist of treacherous territory, where I either spend a ton of time making terrible mistakes and launching terrible products, or they could be huge opportunities that help push the company to new areas of growth. But I'll have to be careful. I'll have to run experiments. And so while this was the visible area I was given, I spent the next year carving away and turning it into this. This was Post-it Note V2, and it was a very visible data practitioner's version of the fog of war, the map. And this map was so valuable that I was able to transition from being head of data to the head of growth. And at that time, growth was a pretty new unknown thing. And I realized that as a product manager, we don't really have a data practitioner's map. We might have roadmaps that tell us what we're going to do in the next few sprints, but what about a map that tells us what to put on that product roadmap? It felt like, as a new PM, all you were doing was trying to convince people with just enough data that your ideas weren't totally crazy. And I spent way more time trying to dissuade people and reject other people's ideas rather than coming up with my own. And so I thought, what if, as a product manager, we work with user researchers, we work with designers. What if I took a step back and became a better product manager of my career and treated this as user research? And take the qualitative data, ideas like, let's ban all customers from canceling orders on our app, and put it into something a little bit more useful. I called this the beginning of my altitude map. It's a qualitative and quantitative representation of the different levels of work and activities that happen in a company. And it helps you visually represent what's happening in the organization. At a high level, you have the company's altitude, our manager's altitude, and then our own. What happens here is that each company level altitude contains 3 things: goals, possibilities, and solutions. We have our managers, goals, possibilities, and solutions, and then our own fully visible layer of goals, possibilities, and solutions. And within my favorite game, this fog of war is, of course, provides you an entire spectrum of the company, but is most fully visible at my altitude. I don't just want a map that focuses on where I am now. I want the opportunity and the possibility of expanding my scope, taking on new roles, maybe getting to the level of altitude of my managers at some point. And so what are these goals, possibilities, and solutions? Well, the goals are simple. It's the OKRs and the KPIs that we have been assigned to by our managers. Possibilities are our range of options, the problems, the opportunity statements, the product areas that we think our hypothesis is that if we nail this, our goals will be achieved. Solutions are those decisions that we finally come down to, the features that we ship to our users. It's what we have opinionatedly decided would be best to solve for that possibility. Now, the beauty of this map is that it facilitates this logical decision-making framework. Let's say we are the product manager of driver allocation. We have a goal of increasing order match rates by 17%. An order match rate being, for every completed order, there is some number of bids that are sent out for a driver to accept, a customer to be picked up, and this ratio is something that we own as a product manager. And so we put on our good product manager hat. We'll do some user research internally. There's, again, always that highest paid person's opinion in the company, the hippo, who always has an idea immediately. And we ask, what should we do? Why can't we increase our order match rates? And so they say, very simple, just prevent people from accepting and force the drivers to accept the orders that are given to them. We have to permanently assign them to every order, and they're not given the opportunity to accept, reject, or ignore those bids. Now, in a data-driven case, I might say that is the dumbest idea I've ever heard of, but because I'm trying to be a good product manager, what separates good PMs from bad PMs is the ability to consider the opportunity behind this suggestion, this solution. And behind this opportunity, this solution, is the opportunity or possibility that drivers might not be accepting orders. Maybe that is why our order match rate has not reached our goal. And this consideration of accepting the potential possibility is a sign of good thinking, the ability to be open-minded about not just the solution, but the question behind the question. And so, good thinking also considers whether or not this is the right solution for this possibility. Assuming that the solution of forced dispatch is the right solution for the possibility that drivers aren't accepting orders, let's evaluate. Yes, we can suppose that drivers aren't accepting orders and that makes up 100% of the problem. The reason why order match rates haven't increased by 17% is because drivers aren't accepting orders. Make sense? But a good product manager does not rely on just their own goals. They consider the goals of others around them. And so, what are our managers' goals? The altitude map is, again, connected at each level. If our managers' goals are to increase driver order completion by 15% and to maintain driver retention rates at 80%, if we were to find that drivers prefer Gojek because of the flexibility we offer in accepting or rejecting rides that they don't want, then we are directly in contradiction with our manager's goal. Which means that if I win, my manager loses, which honestly means we all lose. And so the ability to extrapolate and consider whether or not solutions not only meet our goals, but the goals of our manager above us, is the key to understanding and using the altitude map framework. This actually provides us with agency, the agency to push back, to reject ideas that don't make sense, and the ability to push for ideas that are logically structured and logically feasible according to the altitude map visualization. And the benefit of this is you get compounding wins. Let's accept the good parts of the Hippo's solution, the possibility that drivers aren't accepting orders, and we can continue to make progress. But making progress is hard. Like I said, open-minded thinking requires that we have lots of possibilities, that we think of everything that could potentially be preventing us from reaching our goals. And so let's try a thought exercise. Let's think and close our eyes and think of as many orange things in the world as possible right now. Think of l'orange, an orange. But maybe what if I asked you to think of as many orange things in the world in a construction site? Now we have a little bit more of a concrete space that we've all traveled here today, and we've probably passed some Olympics-related construction. But now I can think of way more things. I can think of an orange cone, a vest, a construction machine. And hopefully you are now thinking of a much more ideas. You're coming up with more concrete spaces to work from. And so as a product manager, what are our construction sites from which we can think of concrete solutions or concrete possibilities? I have 3 techniques that I use. They're calculate, sequence, and segment. Calculate is the first one. As a PM, we are given KPIs that provide us with metrics, and every metric can be broken down into its core components. For the product manager of driver allocation, the bid match rate is constructed of 2 components: the number of completed orders that ultimately were successful, and then the number of times we had to try to get a driver to do that order. And the second piece is sequence. This is taking a lens of the product and working our way backwards. For an order to be completed, the first part of our calculate equation, what needs to happen in the product experience? Well, a customer has to be picked up successfully, which implies that the driver did not cancel the order, and the customer did not cancel the order, which implies that the driver reached the customer at some point, which implies that the driver accepted the order, which implies that the driver received the order. Breaking this down, you can go down as many steps as possible. But now we have a sense of what are all the mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive components that add up to the metric that we have calculated. And the last piece is to segment. It's thinking about who, why, when, where. Why was that booking canceled? Who canceled that order? Was it a driver, customer, the system? It's breaking down further. If the driver did not accept the order, what happened instead? Did they ignore it? Did they reject it? And if that order was ignored or rejected, is it because of a certain type of driver? Is it based on the tenure on their platform? Is it for other demographic reasons? And for orders that were ignored, how do I segment them and consider what types of orders are creating this user experience, ultimately ending up in a customer not being picked up? Now, you could go forever in segmenting. Honestly, how do you know what is the right segmentation criteria? You don't know. You have to guess and hope to be right. But that's why this is structured in such a way where from the top left down to the right, you're cascading rabbit holes, areas where you can get lost and spend a lot of time analyzing. And that's why segmentation is always last. The goal is to get closer to the truth by being less wrong, not always right. Being less wrong is different from being always right. Being less wrong requires safeguards, starting from the macro problems on the left towards the right. The logical stopping point here at segmentation is to consider, again, within the scope of the altitude map, where are the boundaries of our work? If we considered to go through the total earnings of a driver, wanting to go down this rabbit hole of assuming that drivers who aren't earning enough just aren't accepting orders, and perhaps that's why they have troubles, well, we have to zoom out. The altitude map is, again, not just focused on our altitude, but at the altitude of the company level. If the driver benefits product manager, who also reports to our manager, is focused entirely on driver earnings, income, then this is an out-of-scope possibility. Doesn't mean that I can't solve it or target it, but it does mean that I'm about to step on someone else's toes, and that there needs to be an alliance and an agreement and an understanding of the ROI. If I'm solving for someone else's altitude, by definition, I'm not solving for my own. And so I have to be aware of when I'm about to make these missteps. The goal is to consider our own altitude. So let's focus. If I am presented with these opportunities, how do I prioritize the problem? I like to start from the left, focusing on the biggest macro pieces before I segment too deeply down the rabbit hole. And the more time you spend on the left, the better refined your analysis. The more time you spend on the right, the more muddy the waters become. And so if we were to start at number of bids sent, which translate into bookings being canceled or drivers not accepting the orders, I might pull a first analysis and try to understand what is the breakdown of the first layer of analyses within my sequence, my calculate and my sequence components. And I might find that, turns out 15% of orders are canceled, sometimes by the driver, sometimes by the customer. But the greatest chunk of contribution to my KPI is actually in this bid ignored and bid rejected section. 38% is solely the driver's problem. And so should I force drivers to accept orders if it will solve 38% of the problem? We could run this type of analysis forever, but the goal is to create a sense of opportunity sizing for each possibility within our sequence components. The analysis, though, is always effort. Time spent analyzing is always providing us with diminishing returns. Search for answers is always negative utility. The more we search for answers, the better that answer better be for us to have gained better ROI. And so sometimes the easiest way to collect data is to just pick up the phone. And so I did. I called a driver who ignored an order, and I asked them, "What are you doing right now? Why did you ignore that order?" And they were very casual about it. Didn't see it as anything that they'd done wrong. Said, "Yes, I'm eating lunch right now. I'm just getting ready for work, trying to see what's going on the app." It was entertainment to them. And it hit us. Well, these are the first smartphones these drivers have ever had. Of course it's entertainment to them. Everything on the phone is. Why wouldn't this? And so they just weren't understanding the expectations around customer pickups. They didn't realize that every time that order zoomed by on their app and they didn't accept it, that my KPI was getting dinged because it would be sent to another driver. And so, like the fog of war, we have to update our map. This is our Bayesian model of thinking. Until we have enough data, we can't get to the solution. But now I know that this ignored part of my possibility space might be the key to solving my KPI. And sometimes the simplest solution is to look at that key possibility and design an experiment. We don't want to wait too long because we want to spend an appropriate amount of time analyzing and an appropriate amount of time validating. And the best data you can get is from an experiment. So why don't we just tell drivers that they are expected to accept orders? Sometimes the simplest solution really is the right approach. Don't make it too complicated. So we sent an SMS. We told them, "We need you to accept orders. Please accept." And we also did send a control group an SMS that said, "Have a nice day." And we sent another group nothing at all. And turns out it works. Driver acceptance rates increased by 2%. Now, on a relative basis, this was huge. That was thousands of extra orders per day at that time. But remember, we have our altitude map segments. This is where we refer back to our altitude map and go one level down the rabbit hole. Not before the experiment, but after, because we want to see whether or not this worked. And if it did, who did it work for best? And it turns out it was the newest drivers who had the highest probability of changing their behavior because they were informed before they built a habit of ignoring orders on the app. So you can always go back to your altitude map. And what we need to do is update the altitude map to reference the impact of this solution to the altitude map framework's corresponding data points. And we updated the solution itself because you never ship something and never go back to it again, right? We always iterate. When we shipped this feature as an experiment, we went back to the drawing board and said, this was the part that worked the best. How do we now put this into our product experience? Like a fog of war, this area is now fully visible, and we've carved a path towards creating a really great solution for our users. Over time, this part of the map will fade. But as I suggest, the best way to start thinking about your altitude map is to consider, what feature did you just ship? What solution did you just put out into the world? And what impact did it have? On who? On what problem statement? Is that problem statement the most important problem to solve based on your breakdown of sequences, calculations, and segments? And if not, consider this just your SMS. Telling someone to just try this out using the feature that they've just shipped, hopefully will give you an actionable way of putting it on your own altitude map. If you want a template for this, it's in the QR code above. I'll paste a link into our Engage app as well in case you need one. But hopefully, consider this your SMS, your simple response. Just try it, put the last feature that you shipped on your altitude map, and start from there. Thank you.